Maxine, I know, I'm still waiting for it.
Okay, so just went off to you. Oh no. And I'm on Wi-Fi, so I don't know why I should be getting that.
Did you turn that thing on?
That's what you said. No, I just said two more people.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody's here that's going to come. We're ready to start the meeting. Before we begin the item on the agenda, does anyone have any public comment to make that's not about the item on the agenda? Seeing nobody, we'll start this meeting, and were you raising your hand?
No, I was just looking, you're
right in your
bisected.
Well, I can't help it. I don't know what to do.
No, I don't mind that, but I was thinking.
Yeah, I know, it's right in my eyes, I'll have to deal with it.
We can turn it off for now, I mean.
I think everybody knows what the agenda is.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we're mostly talking tonight, so.
All right. First of all, we're here to vote on a draft memorandum that the planning board is going to be presenting to the selectmen tomorrow night. If possible, I would very much like to hold the meeting to 1 hour if we could. I'll start by saying that what this memorandum is and what it isn't. This is not a set of final recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. This is a progress report of where we are in the process, at least as of now. So it's a snapshot of where we are. What we anticipate is that this would form the framework for future discussion in the form of additional planning board meetings and in the form of neighborhood discussions that we initiated last fall. So nothing in this memorandum should be considered carved in stone or immutable or in any way the final word on what we're trying to do. Our job, as given to us by the Board of Selectmen, was to see if there might be some meeting of agreement between the community and Boston Properties as to an appropriate program for development at the Biogen site, and that's what we're trying to do. To date, since May, the Planning Board has had over 35 separate meetings just on this topic alone. That means that we're giving it our best effort to see if we can come to a resolution. I'm not sure if everyone in the room has had a chance to read the memorandum. If not, I'd be happy to read it. It's fairly short. Maybe that's probably the best thing to do anyway, so that we're all on the same page.
I have copies.
Here, I think there are copies. Are there copies out on the?
No, just an agenda. There's,
Okay.
All
right. So I'll read it to people. Before we start, I'd like to just say that for those of you who don't know who we are, I'm Al Adelot. I'm the chairman of the planning board, and my other board members who are here are
Tony Flannery.
Roy Kettledash. And then remotely,
Sue?
Hello?
Yep.
Sue Zacharias.
right, and this is our planner, Imai. Also from Boston Properties, Keir Evans is here to make any comments that might seem appropriate to you here as the discussion goes on. What I'd like to do is read the memorandum, and then if the other board members don't object, open the floor for comments. That's what we're here to do. We're here to listen to people. All right, so I'll read it, and then we can open the floor. This memorandum represents the Planning Board's current status in its effort to develop a framework for achieving an expansion program at 133 Boston Post Road acceptable to both Boston Properties and the Weston community. It is the result of well over 30 meetings with Boston Properties and the community since May, as well as significant input and analysis from engineering and financial consultants. And by the way, there's also a report from the Planning Board's financial consultant relative to this project on the website.
It's on the second page, we just found it.
Second page, all
It's
right.
on the second page if you scroll down.
All right. The board has identified the following factors influencing the potential development program. First, significantly reduced affordable housing SHI deficit and a safe harbor protection. 2, affordable housing consistent with the housing production plan objectives. 3, minimal impacts on viewscapes and no impact on ecology related to the pond. 4, minimal impacts on town open space and recreation amenities. 5, minimal traffic increases and associated impact mitigation measures. 6, minimal impact on schools and town services. 7, limited overall project size. 8, acceptable site access. 9, airtight guarantee of no further expansion. 10, intermodal facility off the table. 11, predictable demographic impacts. 12, reasonable financial returns. 13, minimal uncertainty regarding current and future development limitations. Boston Properties goals and preferences. 1, additional office space consistent with market demands. 2, reduced office facility parking requirements. 3, financial returns that meet corporate standards. 4, combined scale to cover new infrastructure costs. 5, address requirements of existing tenant that controls the site. That's Biogen. 6, residential scale, type, and quality consistent with corporate portfolio goals. 7, minimal uncertainty and reduced risk. The uncertainties that are out there that need to be resolved finally are Waltham approval of the Jones Road access. 2, identification of the senior housing co-developer, the developer who's experienced in developing senior housing. And state certification of a dedicated or a mix of senior housing and the SHI. The board hopes that successful amalgamation of these goals and preferences will result in a mutually agreeable development vision. The outline below seeks to achieve an outcome beneficial to both Boston Properties and the community. The board believes that it addresses the issues enumerated above and is conceptually viable from land planning and financial perspectives, but also realizes that this is not a final resolution. While informally discussed generally, neither Boston Properties nor the community has reviewed or endorsed it as yet. Either or both could ultimately reject it, but the board anticipates that it will form the basis for further discussion at joint meetings with Boston Properties and the community in the coming weeks. The board welcomes any constructive proposal for refining this framework and reaching mutual agreement, and it earnestly hopes that such an agreement will be forthcoming. Potential development program outline. 1, approximately 200 units of senior retirement housing or fewer units of mixed families and seniors. If mixed senior housing to comprise a significant majority of the units. 3, rental development with all units certified in the SHI. By the way, for anyone who doesn't know, SHI stands for Subsidized Housing Index. It's the state index of subsidized housing. We have to achieve 10% of our total housing in the SHI to get to safe harbor, which is what we're trying to get to. Housing located between the North Quarry and the rail line and not visible from conservation or nearby residential land. No construction on the slag heap or near the pond. 5, preferred housing vehicle access via Jones Road, but under no circumstances via Church Street. 6, housing construction begins first and meets all 40B scheduling requirements for the SHI credit on the Weston HPP. By the way, HPP means Housing Production Plan. 7, establish office expansion target to be refined in special permit review, but not greater than 150,000 square feet. 8, office expansion limited to the area north of the existing office building, not visible from the conservation or nearby residential land. No impact on the pond ecology. 9, office vehicle access via Route 20. 10, office-related parking requirements reduced from the town standard. 11, project-related traffic increase does not require major off-site improvements. 12, maximum limit for total new construction, perhaps equaling the existing office building area, excluding parking and waste management facilities. 13, deferred consideration of the intermodal facility, the train station. 14, further office, commercial, and residential expansion prohibited with no exceptions. 15, the escrow fund to address unforeseen off-site impacts. 16, shared management and maintenance of the conservation land and rail trail assets if it's mixed housing. 17, office building and tenants implement best practices in reducing commuter traffic and employee trips. The board anticipates that the process is going to continue according to what looks like the probable timeline leading up to town meeting, which is the draft of recommendations to the selectmen. This is the first draft, and this is the progress report tomorrow. The Planning Board joint development community meetings and discussions March 1st through the 12th. That's when we get together with community citizens and Boston Properties, joint meetings to talk about what's acceptable to the two sides and whether we can come together and have an agreement. The draft development agreement modification, which is what we would be voting on at town meeting, to be done by March 25th. The final planning board recommendations go to the selectmen on the 27th of March, and then the warrant closes on April the 3rd. So that's getting up to the closing of the warrant. Then if it goes on the warrant, we're devoted 3 weeks to refining the development agreement until April the 20th, and then the final agreement language May the 1st, in preparation for town meeting May the 7th, and then anticipates the Zoning Board of Appeals comprehensive permit hearing on June the 20th. So that's kind of the outline. We've got essentially 2 months to get it done, or not. So, having said that, I think we can start trying to field questions, or at least take comments. Yes, sir. Identify yourself before you make your comment.
Peter Sonneven, Gypsy Trail. the designation of 200 units of senior housing, how does the town propose to secure that that housing will always be solely for senior housing or limited family? Is it through a covenant that runs with the land, or is there another mechanism?
It would be in the development agreement. It would be the same kind of restriction in the development agreement and in the deed restrictions that maintain it as affordable.
Would there be any opportunity at some future date for the developer to change the rental status to, say, a condominium status and sell off the units? Because of the development agreement?
Because of the development agreement and because of how it was built, the agreement would have to run in perpetuity, not only with the town and the development agreement, but it also goes to the agreements that are recorded on its deed with Mass Housing, with the state, DHCD.
There's a big difference between rental and ownership regarding SHI credit, so Mass Housing would be very big. So they're going to give us credit for rentals, they're going to require that they always do that.
But if the law changed at some future date, would there then be an opportunity to change the use of the residential units?
We'd have to have an ironclad, unbreakable covenant with the developer that ran with the land in perpetuity. I mean, it would preclude any ability to do that. Yes?
Maybe I've missed this, but how will it fulfill?
Could you identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan Smith, 4 Old Road. How will it, senior housing fulfill the requirement for 40B for the present and the future?
According to what I understand about the state's calculation of our SHI deficit, we need about 275 units of affordable housing total to get to safe harbor, according to the state's definition. That is, then the town would truly have control over any further affordable housing. Doesn't mean it would be the end of affordable housing, but we'd have control. The HPP identified the 200-unit target in its calculations. We think that it's entirely possible to make up the difference between the 200 units and the 275 we need for permanent safe harbor in other ways. So that's why we're trying to strike that balance. There's a balance between the number of units that are built on the site and what the site can take. From a land planning perspective, there's only so much land, and so we're trying to put the housing in a particular place. We're trying to keep it as small as possible so that it stays in that place, and it would still give us enough units so that we feel we can get over the safe harbor deadline. What this would do would give us 2 years of safe harbor to find places for additional housing. We need to, and we could do that by finding another additional 20 units in 2 years, and so forth and so on, until we get to the 275.
If it's unclear, it's not just senior housing, it's senior 40B housing.
Right.
So 20% of it is affordable and for seniors.
So how many units would qualify for 40B?
All
Of the 200?
all of them.
All of them. That's great. And we need senior housing.
Exactly.
Better plan than the first one.
Yes.
Paula Gleistine, 87 Church Street. Can you explain to them that when we do the senior housing, that they are smaller units and they will be, we can have more that credit to 40B than the units that would be just
Non-senior.
yeah. So we get more credits in 40B for senior housing.
Well,
I think she means per area.
I think you're talking about the
Yeah,
size
per
of
area, per area.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong about this here. And by the way, I'm speaking from the HPP perspective, not necessarily from Boston Properties perspective on the number of units, but senior housing on average, if you take an average, a unit of senior housing would be about 900 square feet, gross square feet. Family housing would require about 1,500 square feet. So 200 units of family housing would make a significantly larger project than 200 units of senior housing. So that goes to, again, to tailoring the size of the project to the land available, and gives us more flexibility in land planning. And it's also provision of affordable senior housing is one of the goals in our housing production plan. I mean, it's an express targeted goal.
So, but just let me clarify, you get the same credit for senior housing as you do non-senior housing.
On the
40B.
SHI.
Right, that doesn't change. So then we don't gain or lose based upon it being senior housing.
Okay.
Yes.
Cara Gavin, 21 Crescent Street. Can you please speak to the financial analysis that was conducted? Unfortunately, I don't think anyone in the room other than yourselves has read it. Could you just tell us what happened and summarize the findings?
Actually, why don't, Tony, I'm going to toss that ball to you.
Let me go check my latest numbers. So I'll just speak without notes for a second here. So what we hired a financial analyst to do was basically look at two projects. The projects that Boston Properties initially proposed and the project that you have in front of you today. And then we said, take a look at all the costs involved in that and perform a calculation to determine the return on that investment for the developer. And basically, is the return for that developer within reasonable return with regard to industry standards? So our analyst took a look at it and looked at both projects. And both projects actually had two parts. They had a residential part and they had an office part. And he did a deep calculation of all the inputs and concluded that the project that you see in front of you results in reasonable return for a developer. So
did you vary the size of the commercial space in that analysis, or did you leave it fixed?
I believe he left it at one size, which I believe is either 100 or 125,000 square feet.
100 or 125?
Yeah, 125. But it didn't vary. It was just one number.
It was only one number?
Yeah, exactly.
Is there a reason you didn't vary it?
I think we wanted a point to look at and then to compare it to the Boston Properties proposal. So it was varied in that direction. So
Okay.
it was varied versus theirs.
Okay.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
we
Just
had to
out of
pick.
curiosity.
Yeah, we had to pick a size that, you know, we thought was reasonable, and looking at the site, we kind of thought that was reasonable. You know, there was only so much time to go through so many iterations of running the model and different variable inputs. So, you know, that was our kind of our best guess as to what.
One thing I'd like to say is that one of the meetings that we anticipate having sometime in the next month or so is a meeting with the financial consultant, so that he can speak to us directly, and we're not trying to paraphrase what he's saying, and also would have a chance to have the discussion with Boston Properties, so that, you know, everybody's sort of on the same page with respect to the financial analysis and what it means.
We did follow up with Boston Properties, and we had them, of course, review the financial and get their opinions. And they were surprisingly close to the conclusions of the analysts. Of course, there were some differences, and we hope to resolve those differences, like Al said, with the two parties being in front of us and discussing those differences.
Yes, maybe a quick clarification. I fully agree. I was actually surprised that on the cost side, we were within percentage points with the financial analysis, so he did an excellent job. One piece he did not include in his analysis was any rent or income calculations. So in order to do an analysis as to whether the projects are spinning off a certain return, he would need to advise on what he believes are current market rents, or what are, what's being supported by the market today. So I think that's one more step that
We're refining the elements, yeah.
But we're close on the cost side. That's a good thing, and then we would just need to see where he feels the current market rents are, because that's what is dictating the final return. Final returns.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Liz Valenta, 22 Brook Road. Could you clarify what you mean by senior housing? Would the age restriction be, what would be the sort of general restriction to the housing?
Well, the image we have is a retirement community that doesn't require excessive commitment on the town's part for emergency services. So minor, if any, on-site medical facilities. It's going to depend a little bit on the sorry, I can't see you. It's going to depend a little bit on the proposal that the senior housing developer comes to us with, but somewhere in that range. Minor medical facilities to just a straight retirement community.
My question is more, what is the actual age that you're...
We're thinking of 55 and older, that sort of range. But again, that's got to be refined by the developer of the senior housing. And currently there are 2 senior housing developers who are, I think they're both still in the game, who Boston Properties is talking to. Boston Properties is not typically a developer of senior housing, but they're talking to 2 developers who are very experienced. I don't think I'm letting the cat out of the bag to say that one of them is Benchmark. Benchmark's headquarters happens to be on Jones Road. Benchmark's the company happens to live in Weston, and they do really excellent senior housing developments, and they have expressed interest. They think there's a market here for the kind of housing that they offer. So these are real proposals by reputable and experienced developers.
And we want to work with the state very carefully to make sure that every decision about the structure of it gave us full credit on SHI. Now, on the senior development, we have talked previously about, so there's basically just restricted to seniors, then there's a level of assistance, then there's memory care, and then there's emergency care. And I think where we ended up was just a development focused on the first level. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a whole spectrum there.
Yeah, right.
Where you can specialize. I believe the 2 groups are, one is evaluating what's called an active adult, which is basically a plus 55 type community, and then the other is looking at what I would say like is one step up from that, which they call assisted care, but that is in turn one step down from what would be a memory care type facility.
Yes.
Hi, Phoebe Byerly, 70 Hotspur Road. Can you guys speak to whether the financial analysis considered the Jones Road access costs? And then also, if it did, what, can you speak to any of the outcomes of that or impact of that on the project cost? And also, I'm curious if there's any update on what that looks like, how that plan would be. I saw a post. It looks like a post was installed recently as a marker, and I'm just curious, especially how Jones Road access would impact the rail trail connection points, which is in development right now, as you guys know.
Okay, so I think first of all, Tony, I hand the football back to you, and then maybe here you could address the configuration of the access.
So I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me, so I'm a little nervous talking about numbers, but the answer to the question is yes. That was a major reason why we did the financial analysis, was because the developer was telling us the infrastructure cost to build this was very high, and therefore they needed more scale than we really anticipated. So they took a deep dive into the Jones Road access. And I recall the overall cost, and you'll have this documentation in front of you, the infrastructure developed, Jones Road and some other things, basically the infrastructure cost was around 10 million, according to them. So that was built in.
Okay, so did you compare that with other access points, like in terms of the return on investment or what that means for the town? I mean, we have the number.
Yeah, there was oh, you mean in other projects?
Yeah, like what would the return on investment be if it was a different access point? Did you look at the, like,
There were no other options.
There aren't any
There are no other options.
What option would there be?
Yeah.
The only other option is Route 20.
right,
Well,
that's an option.
no, he didn't look at the Route
Okay.
20
Yeah.
So that's what I'm asking. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're comfortable as a town committing to $10 million worth of this project being.
Well, we could, again, we're not done with the discussion.
Yeah.
We could look at the Route 20 access if that seems to be something that people really want to take a closer look at. But that has, we've got, you may remember that we went through a whole series of discussions about the fact that Biogen breaks out in a rash when you talk about having the housing access over without a Route 20.
I guess as a citizen of this town,
Yeah.
like for us to stomach $10 million versus Biogen, like up in arms, like that's something as we're paying tax out. That's you know that's the cost.
Well,
of,
we don't pay the 10 million.
I know, but like in terms of this project going forward and meeting our goals, it's a.
I mean,
we could get more units, or we could get rid of the commercial project.
We're open to looking at the Route 20 access. I'm just reminding you that there's some baggage that goes along with
I
it.
understand.
And we did meet with Biogen as well on the Route 20 access. We did try to argue our.
All right, so is there plans developed then for what that would look like?
Yes,
So we could.
I can answer that part.
Yeah.
There are plans online. You might, they come off the co-organized website onto the town website, you know?
I got on the ones that you mailed to me, so it's on the town website, yeah. Yeah, so there are on the town website,
Yeah.
the Jones Road access.
So I believe you get two-part question. First, just what does it look like in general? Comes out of the north of the site, if you will, and then hooks right onto Jones Road. So we would have to build a new auto bridge, sort of in the footprint of the truss bridge that's there today. I've been asked to try to either preserve the truss bridge or to somehow incorporate it into the new bridge, which we're looking at as a future design question. But basically, you have to drop a new bridge in place with where the abutments are today, supporting the existing, expand a little bit, and then you have one lane either direction, so it's a two-lane road going in that direction, which heads out to Jones Road, following underneath, essentially following underneath the footprint of the high tension lines that are there today, and then would go into Jones Road. We had to do some grading and things because it's a fairly narrow burn that supports the road today.
Have you worked with Eversource to?
We have, we met with Eversource and then the DCR. So the plan is to fully incorporate the rail trails as well. It would be a separate, so it wouldn't be just striping part of the road. It would be a physically separate rail trail. I believe, I think right now we're working with a minimum of 8 or 10 feet. It's the DCR standard. I believe it might be 10 feet. And that's separated by a guardrail between the road. So you have road, 2 feet of grass and a guardrail, and then the rail trail. And would follow from the west where it would get picked up and being built in, and then continue to Jones. That's part.
All right, you had a question, sir.
Yeah, sorry, I might have missed it, but sorry, John Rose and Senator Weaver. For the new housing units, the ratio of family versus senior living, what do you think that ratio would be? I know it's not final, but the sort of proposal.
We're still trying to work that out. I mean, we're pushing for mostly senior, if not all senior. But what mostly means is we don't quite know yet. We have to work that out in the next month or so.
Okay, and just one follow-up to that, which I'm assuming will get changed based on what y'all determine on the ratio. When the financial impact report was done online, it looked like the town said there was about $700,000 or so impact to school expenses. Did they look at what the average class size in town would be based on the plan? How will it increase, decrease based on the assumptions? And I know that's all been changed based on the ratio of senior housing, but I based on what Boston Properties initially proposed.
Boston Properties did look at that, and they did a study based on all family housing, and at that time it was 345 units of family housing. And here I just ask you, what could you maybe summarize what your study revealed?
Yes, we did an initial study, which we met with FinCom, and get my dates mixed up, but basically April of last year. And the initial study came up with a range of students, and then the school board and school committee and FinCom asked us to look at a broader, call it worst case scenario. Yep. Right. So we had the fiscal analysis and then we ran that through. So again, that was right. So that was based on the 345 units, and also with a larger distribution of 2 and 3 bed units within that 345. So that came up. Unfortunately, it's not an exact science, right? So it came up with a range of about 110 up to 200 students. And that would be distributed over K through 12. And what's typically seen in these developments is that the attraction of younger children is higher than older children. So you'd probably see something, like 60% of that students going up into the, call it K through 7th or K through 7th, 8th grade.
But when the town said that there was about a $700,000 cost to the town, did that assume adding teachers, or did that assume that you just have expenses associated with students, but the average class size goes up as you increase the school population by about, I'm guessing it's around 10+%?
Right. So we picked an average class size based on what the town has today. So we said, okay, if you want to maintain that average class size with these added students, how many teachers we can need to add? And that's where you came up with the impact.
And when the town approves or doesn't approve the plan, how do folks in town know what the town's going to do on the school side in concert with us?
Well,
or not?
Just to take a step back, one of the reasons why we were sort of focusing more on senior housing, apart from the other benefits, is exactly that.
Yeah, no, exactly.
On the school system. And it seemed to us that you can argue about whether the statistics are right or what the costs are, but if the impact is 0 or close to it, that's that obviously helps mitigate that concern.
Just to get the percentages, there's about 2,000 students in the Weston schools, K through 12. And so the range that you outlined was that would be an increase from 5 to 10% of students. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, if you assume they all came into the town on day one.
Yeah, right.
But sorry, but the question that I had, and I appreciate the benefits of the senior housing, is that when a decision is made, is there a decision made at the same time about, let's assume a case where there's no senior housing for a second, and it is the case that's laid out. Is there a decision for the town budgeting about how to handle that on the school side at the same time that the town votes on approving? Or do you vote on the project and then the town figures out how to handle it after?
I think I speak for the planning board when I say that all family housing for us is a non-starter. Okay. We're going to be making recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. And so we're pretty strongly committed to providing a significant amount of senior housing on the site. So I don't see
it's not
a
necessarily
million family housing units here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Terry Eastman, Vision Hill Road. There's mention of parking in the report, in the draft. There's no mention of the parking structure. Are we to assume that that is being eliminated in your recommendation?
I imagine they're probably going to need a parking structure. The size of the structure, they have one now.
I mean, a new.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going to take an expanded parking structure of my guess is 2 levels, maybe 3, but probably 2. We're going to be talking about reduced parking standards. We're going to be talking about traffic and parking in the special permit process. We're going to be talking about traffic demand management, TDM, which is something that has been refined since the planning board's initial site plan review 20 years ago. And so the whole idea is to keep the number of cars on the lot, or the provision for parking cars on the lot, more reflective of what actually happens. If you go to the parking lots now that were stipulated under the town's zoning bylaw requirements, you can go there any time of the day, half the parking lot's empty. So we may be building a parking garage for virtual cars that are mandated by the zoning bylaw, which aren't necessary for real cars. So we're going to try to be as flexible as possible on identifying what the real traffic demands are and tailoring those demands to what's provided for parking.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that? At one point, there was a discussion about if the town allowed a commercial building, which many of us do not want, that then Biogen would consider offsite parking, so to decrease the traffic impacts. That was brought up at one of the neighborhood meetings,
okay,
so that more people would park offsite and be bused to the office building as opposed to increasing parking to the same standard that exists now.
Right, and again, that's part of that discussion about what's really necessary and what can be done to manage traffic demand. That may be, I think maybe that kind of discussion we need to have more of, for sure.
Yeah, we had a discussion with Biogen. They have a pretty thorough bus network on them. You know, they go east and west.
No, I know. That's why
those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That's the best practice that we're trying to build into this. That not only reduce the parking, but reduce the traffic into it.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So the other question I had is, if Benchmark becomes our partner, wouldn't it, out of necessity, become an all-senior housing development if Benchmark was the partner?
Well, Benchmark would be the partner for the senior housing piece, but there might still be a family housing piece that Boston Properties would do directly, because Boston Properties does actually do housing development. They just don't do senior housing development, which is a specialized field.
And that seems to be something new that is on the table, because I thought before we were talking about an all-senior housing development if we had a partner such as Benchmark.
Part of it has to do, I think, with what the state's going to let us do. You know, so
have you had discussions with them about that?
We have. We're still having discussions with them.
Okay.
But my hope is it's senior, but certainly mostly senior. And I mean significantly mostly senior. Yes.
Frank Collin, 96 Church. I have two questions. I assume that coming up with 200 units, and presumably affordable housing senior, is based on a blend of development needs and return, as well as meets the town's obligation for the affordable housing, 270 or whatever. But on the office park size, from the rate of return, I mean, there's no externality to the office park size for the town. So financially, how does the rate of return change if instead of 125,000 square feet office building, it was 100 or 90 or 80,000? So that's my first question.
And I think that's what we're going to be, one of the things we're going to be talking about in the neighborhood meetings and with the financial consultant, because I think there are going to be different perspectives on that.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, we'll dig into that.
My second question is a broader one, to the extent it's appropriate to ask. What are the 2, 3, 4 primary points of disagreement or of still open discussion? I assume one is the blend of senior versus family, or just generally rental units. And I understand the town, his point is putting out 200 units and ideally senior housing. But what's the other end of it? What's Boston Property proposing as kind of their starting point for negotiation on senior housing units? So we have some quantification. And are there other points kind of high on the priority list of points of disagreement, just to focus us, on what to be thinking about?
Well, Offsite Properties would like a larger number of housing units, 200. They'd like a larger office building at 125,000. And so we'll have to have that discussion.
All right, I'll let you off the hook with that answer.
It's pretty simple. Don't get any more complicated than that.
Yes. I think the other feedback, or the other points of contention is not the right word, but the other concerns that were raised by the town that we tried to address. Moving off of Church Street, obviously, which we've agreed to do. There's a lot of what I'll call design requests as far as moving stuff as far away from Duck Pond as possible and minimizing the sight lines to the project, which I definitely think we can do. We can move the building off the hill and condense as much as we can. For those of you who have been to the site on that field area at the back of the project. And then also, with respect to the office building, pulling the western edge of the building as far away from the pond as possible, which there's some existing tree cover there which helps screen it. We can also plant more trees. I think those were two of the other big points that were initial concerns of the planning board that we've worked to address.
No, and I think of that, we appreciate that. I was trying to think incrementally in the 60 days that are left.
Understood.
The issue that I take it are the number of residential units and the mix, senior versus family, and the other one is the size of the office building. Is there a third kind of large issue?
Easier one.
What's that?
An easier one?
I think an ironclad building development agreement is a big one.
I don't think
that's not a point.
That's not a point.
Okay, that's not a point of contention, but I think the language used in whatever development agreement that's made has to be very carefully scrutinized.
Remember, we have 2 months to work that out. We have March and April to work that out. So the first thing is to try to reach consensus on the framework of the development, and then how to codify that in the development agreement language. So what we're hoping to do is get across the agreement finish line by the end of March, and then if it looks promising with some sort of a draft development agreement at that time, then take that forward, refine that in April, so that we're ready to go to town meeting with something that people can live with in May. So sort of two steps. Yes, sir.
Okay. What's the likelihood for the Jones Road access? Because all the planning will be based on the successful Waltham approval of Jones Road entrance. So if the DP focuses here, so what's the likelihood?
Maybe you could just bring people up to date on how things are going in Waltham.
Sure. So we are going to apply for the permit from Waltham when we finalize what the development will look like with the planning board, because I didn't want to go to them without having a designation of what it was. I'm sure many of you have read the mayor's letter expressing her disapproval of the process. That being said, frankly, it's not the mayor's decision, it's the zoning board's decision, and then ultimately the state's decision. So the likelihood of success is very high, but we would expect that in case we're not done with that before the town meeting, that the development agreement would be entirely contingent upon success there. So if you're worried about making sure that we stay focused on Jones Road being the access solution, that would be my recommendation for how we would put that in writing.
So your application to Waltham for the Jones Road access is a 40B application?
It's the same
follows
process.
the same 40B process that any comprehensive permit would follow?
Exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Nick Leisteen, 87 Church Street, Weston. I have 3 quick questions. What are the parameters that you're working with in terms of what would be just residential units and how much assisted living and what percentage might be long-term, nursing home units? Because obviously the latter categories are much more intensive in terms of people working there, coming and going to work there, and then impact on traffic and parking. Second question is, could you also clarify, you referred to the fact that we need to at least consider the possibility of having a mixed family requirement in there as well. I don't understand that. What is that state requirement that would mandate that? I would think there would be a lot of impetus to have clearly 100% senior housing and nothing but, for all the obvious reasons. And the final question is, what is the mix, maybe you said this already here, of between 1, 2, and 3 bedroom houses in the proposal we're looking at right now? Units, not houses.
All right. The first question is that we're hoping for, the target is the lowest 2 tiers of care. In other words, active adult retirement community would be the target, or the next level up at most, the assisted living target, but nothing above that, not long-term care, not memory related, that sort of thing. So we're looking at a facility that would require the least amount of commitment on the town's part for services. So that's the first question. The second question, don't ask me why the state. At first, that my impression was that the state sort of said, okay, the senior housing idea is a good idea, but the sense I've gotten is that they've sort of backed off that a little bit and come back a little bit with a suggestion that they would prefer some sort of a mix. And Imai, is that a fair characterization?
I think, yeah, that is a fair characterization. They would allow it. They've allowed all of these to be 40B, senior housing to be all 40B before, but
they have, yes.
They as a general kind of overarching principle are looking to house families, and so they do try and push for that. That's not to say that it absolutely would happen, but yeah, it's something we should consider.
We're trying to nail down on that. We're coming to the state with a couple of points. The first is that the housing production plan does call out the need for affordable senior housing in town as a goal, providing that housing as a goal right in the housing production plan, number one. And number two, I think one of the cases we're going to try to make is that there are opportunities for family housing elsewhere, that it's, that you don't have to mix everybody in every project. So, and then the third thing is that, as Imai points out, they have permitted dedicated senior housing in other places. So we're still focused on that, but again, it's something that we need to nail down in the next month or so.
Does the state have that much discretion in mandating this?
They certify the project.
Yeah. Presumably they're dictated by statutory standards and the rules that apply to
There's some
40B.
interpretation, yeah, there's a lot of interpretation.
A lot of interpretation of the state.
I would think that we would certainly want to enhance the position that we would have only senior housing to the extent we could as a town. Because obviously having families is much more impactful on all of us as neighbors to have lots of kids coming up and down. Because the intensity of the size of the project is different. If it's 10 houses, it's different than 200 units. So the potential impact on all the neighborhoods, if it is families, is huge.
Right. Again, we're not.
I know you're on board
arguing
yeah.
with you. I mean, we're supporting senior housing, but we're doing the best we can to try to work out a solution that accomplishes that goal as closely as we can get it. And then the third question, which is what mix are we looking at? We're not at mixes yet. With senior housing, it's 1 or 2 bedrooms. With family housing, it's usually 2 to, with a scattering of 3 bedrooms. That depends on the percentage. But we're not there yet.
But you would presume, would you not, that the neighborhood support for this would be contingent on it being senior housing only, from our standpoint?
Well, we recognize that there's a very strong
Assume everybody here would
preference for
agree with that
senior housing
statement?
in the town. Yeah. Yes.
Sarah Radigan. I'm on the Affordable Housing Trust. There's some other of us trustees here as well. A perspective that I just wanted to bring in, and it's really answering to your last point. I'm not sure your name, sorry. It's from from the state's perspective, from federal government's perspective, and just sort of like from a bigger policy perspective, we have to, I think it's important for us to be very sensitive to the fact that the town shouldn't be discriminating against certain types of families. And to the extent that this project may be all seniors, that may be okay under the circumstances. I mean, I'm just saying okay from sort of my personal viewpoint, but the town can't be discriminating against families. And so to the extent that we need to support more affordable housing options throughout the town, I think we really have to be really careful about how we sort of try to allow housing in only such a way that we feel isn't going to be impactful on our schools. Our schools really can take some more students. And one of the really difficult downsides of being in such an affluent community is that if we price out families that are not from families of multimillionaires, that's a real detriment to our community. So I completely appreciate the incredible work that the planning board has put into unbelievable hours and hours and hours of time on this. And I do appreciate the ways that you feel that the senior housing may be less impactful on this particular site, because there are quite a bit of development constraints. But I would really urge both neighbors, the planning board, the selectmen, as you're thinking about this, to be open to both a mix at this site, if it can be done. Know that family housing does not have to be 1,500 square feet per unit. Warren Avenue is a project that has family housing, and those units are quite a bit smaller than that.
I'm just going by Boston Properties standards.
That's true, and so I'm sorry, so here.
I was just saying, our average size, it was 9,000 square feet.
But that's
right.
That's net. I mean, that doesn't include the shared spaces or any of the rest of it, right? It's just the unit itself.
Correct.
Yeah, so gross. I'm throwing in, just okay.
Right, and so, I mean, I understand that this is, in part, it's driven by our desires, and in part, it's driven by sort of market considerations. And we want the project to be a good one. We want you to be able to lease it up. We want, the market rate units to be rented at really good values to be able to support the whole project. So it's just an appeal to hope that everybody will consider both sides of this.
I would just jump in and say I completely disagree with that, because the scale of this particular project, as a percentage of housing units in the town of Weston, is so huge that the idea of having families would make or break this project. We're trying to come forward with an idea, particularly with the senior housing, that would somehow possibly work and have the neighborhoods in turn and support this project in a way that doesn't wreck the whole system with the school system, the neighborhood, and people roaming up and down the rail trail in high densities because there's suddenly 500 people that live there and active families that don't live there now. It's just a nature preserve. So I completely disagree with that. It doesn't, all your statements, well, in concept make sense, but in scale with this particular project make no sense at all, particularly for all its neighborhood people in the city of Weston, the town of Weston. So I completely disagree.
Well, I'm sure that, I mean, I didn't expect there to be a kumbaya meeting. But I mean, these are issues that, I mean, absolutely everybody's opinion is valuable in this, and we're trying to strike a balance, and we're hoping for a balance that most people can agree with. We have a month to do it, maybe we will, my fingers are crossed. But I appreciate your perspective, and I understand exactly what you're saying, Sarah. And I don't think anybody is actually trying to be
I don't disagree with Sarah.
To preclude the possibility of family housing. There are other possibilities where that might happen in a less impactful way. Let's put it that way. All right. Anybody else have any questions? One more, and then I'm going to have to call it quits. All right. All right, Diana, you got to comment.
I just wanted to, I wrote little something so I don't get off track, but Diana Chaplin, Loveland. I would encourage the citizens of Weston to recognize that this development is a choice that does not need to occur at all. Town officials seem to be convinced we are threatened by 40B development, yet there is not one example of a hostile 40B to have ever been built in Weston. Why is Weston so concerned with meeting a 50-year-old mandate? Let's be innovative as a town and remember and be proud that we do not need to fit into an optional state format that might not be appropriate for our semi-rural community.
Okay, thank you. Good. In that case, we're meeting with the selectmen tomorrow night at 7:30. Asking for all the
And we have the rail trail going there too. I'm so opposed to that. I wonder if you're one of my neighbors.
So you want to give your eye for that?